Remember the optimism we all had with the Denver Broncos as they were entering the start of the 2022 season? We're now in February and the season did not go as planned. Welcome back to my 2022 NFL Exit Report series as I take a first look into one of the teams in the AFC West. We've covered two divisions. Now we're going to the AFC West, and it's the Denver Broncos. And yes, the season didn't quite go as expected, but let's retrace the steps as I go back through my process as to how I looked at this team and what I was looking for as I was deciding on season win totals, how the season played out, and so on. Same format as always. So a year ago at this time, the Denver Broncos stuck in purgatory. That's right. A typical season for them, 8-8, 9-8, 8-9, right around there. Not close enough to the top of the pack to get a young quarterback to jumpstart their franchise. Not far enough back where they would be in rebuilding mode. They always felt that they were close in terms of, yes, we can make the playoffs. We can make some noise once in the playoffs. And of course, they had a 3-year run with Vic Fangio, an excellent defensive mind. Denver put up some great defensive numbers, but bottom line, he made a lot of crunch time decisions that cost them a lot of close games. It was reflected in their schedule and in their standings when they finished 7-10, but they finished 7-10 with a decent point ratio, so we thought things could be looking up. And then, of course, in the offseason, here we go, and we have a changing of the guard, not only in terms of offensive-minded head coach Nathaniel Hackett, but they pull off a really, really big trade, and they go out and get Russell Wilson. Now, when the trade was made, I didn't like it. Not because I didn't think Russell Wilson could thrive, but it was a king's ransom for Seattle. They got first-round picks in 2022 and upcoming in 2023. Also, second-round picks, 3 players, Noah Fant, weakening Denver's tight end group, Shelby Harris, weakening depth along the defensive line, and Drew Lock, who was expendable, obviously, when you pick up a quarterback such as Russell Wilson, but obviously that meant a backup problem in case Russell Wilson got hurt. They'd have to groom another backup quarterback. So what a colorful offseason right away. You go from a defensive-minded coach to an offensive-minded coach, and now you have some roster holes. And Russell Wilson, while not a peak performer with Seattle the past year or two, was certainly considered, in most people's cases, a top, let's say, 7 to 10 quarterback, and maybe in some cases still a top 5 quarterback. Optimism abounded. We saw that with their season win total, roughly 10, even 10.5 in some spots. But we knew that there was going to be a tricky schedule ahead. So as I looked after the draft, which was a decent enough draft, not a perfect draft, of course, because they were void of early round picks, and looking at hoping for them that they would have wide receiver health. Hamler and Cortland Sutton, they both come off injuries. They were going to have to groom new tight end. The offensive line looked pretty good. The defense was in good shape, but the coaching, would that change things? So here were my seasonal keys. The first seasonal key that I wrote on my team sheet that I put together in July and August was this: would they fix the pass rush post Von Miller? And what I mean by that is that last year they traded Von Miller to the Rams. Everybody knows that. And after that happened, sack totals for Denver decreased. For the year, in reading my sheet, they had 36 defensive sacks, but they only had 11 defensive sacks in the last half of the season, barely over 1, not even 1.5 sacks per game at the end of the season. That's not going to get it done. That's going to put a lot of pressure on your pass D. Obviously, Von Miller was an impact player, and they didn't adequately replace him. They were hoping that Bradley Chubb would take the next step in terms of his pass rushing ability, but losing Von Miller was big. I cautiously moved the number up from 36 to 38. And we were going to see how that went. But 38 in a 17-game schedule was basically average. So I didn't expect Denver to repeat what used to be some better totals when they had Bradley Chubb and, more importantly, when they had Von Miller. My second seasonal key that I had going into the season was, would there be defensive regression without Fangio? We saw that they had Patrick Surtain, a rookie cornerback who just thrived. I think cornerback is one of the toughest positions to play in the NFL, if not the toughest position for a rookie to play in the NFL. And Patrick Surtain was amazing in his first season. But coupled with the loss of Fangio and with an average at best sack pass rush, I thought there would be some regression. The question would be how much regression, because if you've added Russell Wilson and if you've added an offensive-minded head coach, maybe you can make up for some of that regression offensively and you would score more points than you had previously, and maybe you'd make better game time decisions, whereas Vic Fangio let them down in that regard. So even with some regression, there was still some positivity as to what might happen. My third of four keys was managing expectations amidst a tough schedule. The NFC West had to play the AFC West had to play the NFC West. That already gives you San Francisco, a very strong defensive team with, we thought, Trey Lance at quarterback to start the season, with some growing pains there. The defending Super Bowl champion, the Los Angeles Rams, a powerful offense in Arizona, and if the coaching was better, the defensive, they had enough players to make things work defensively. And then Seattle, who we'll get to much later on, but I thought maybe would be a little bit under the radar. And of course, as the schedule makers were wont to be as they create these interesting matchups, week one of the 2022 NFL season, what else but Russell Wilson going back to Seattle as a member of the Denver Broncos to play the Seattle Seahawks in an intriguing and obviously emotional game. So the schedule makers, obviously, ratings would be high week one for that. The schedule all along was going to be pretty tough. They were playing Tennessee. They were playing Baltimore. Obviously, their own division was going to be tough with the Rams with Devontae Adams and tight end Waller back. You got the Chargers with Justin Herbert, and of course, the Kansas City Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes. So this was not going to be an easy schedule. And then the final key, and maybe my most important key, we saw Seattle's offensive line always be talked about in the negative. Oh, they can't protect Russell Wilson. Part of the blame, yes, probably was heaped on Russell Wilson because he tried to extend plays in the pocket. But more of the blame was always being placed on Seattle. My question going into 2022 here in Denver with an offensive line that was cohesive, at least four of the five starters had played together for multiple seasons. My question was, what was the cause of all the sacks in Seattle? And would we see any problem with Russell Wilson being here where sacks would ramp up? There were 40 defensive sacks with unsung quarterbacks with Denver in 2021. I projected 37 defensive sacks in 2022, an average number. I didn't expect the number to go way down, even with a strong offensive line, but I did expect with the veteran and savvy Russell Wilson and with some strong run-pass balance that they would be able to keep the sacks down to average levels, which would allow Russell Wilson to extend plays when necessary with his legs, but also run the offense without fear of an offensive line letting him down, because this was an offensive line that was considered a top 10 offensive line. So going into the season, we're kicking off. I did not make a future play on the Denver Broncos. Reason being is, once again, I'm not a big fan of making overplays. The Pythagorean theorem and the suggested that Denver was better than their record of 2021. The coaching, while I didn't do a deep dive on Nathaniel Hackett, which I wish I would have, I thought would be at least a little bit better in offensive play calling and game day decision making. And Russell Wilson was an upgrade in everybody's mind. I mean, let's not go back and say, oh, I knew Russell Wilson was going to be poor. None of us knew Russell Wilson was going to have the 2022 season he did. All of us were optimistic. I challenge people to say that no, Russell Wilson was going to have the kind of year that he really did. So all total, I thought there's so many teams in the AFC West that were given high win totals. And then you had the Raiders at 8.5 or 9. And then you had the Chargers at 10, 10.5, Denver 10, 10.5, and Kansas City at 10.5. You had just so many teams. Somebody was not going to be able to hold its own. And I had enough issues with what was going to happen defensively with this team, and more importantly, with the pass rush, that I just stayed on the sidelines and was going to see how the season would play out. Now, during the season, I had a lot of success, so I'm very happy for that. Right away, I took Seattle as an underdog, a lofty underdog, according to my power ratings, an unsubstantiated 6.5-point dog right away against the Denver Broncos at home. Seattle at home, 6.5-point dog. Russell Wilson coming back. Pete Carroll's a great teacher of the game. There were enough weapons offensively to predict that Denver and Seattle would play a close game. I thought that was a good way to start the season. Then San Francisco had injury problems week 3, yet San Francisco was still a 4-point favorite over against a more experienced Denver team. That was a good win for me. Las Vegas was favored over Denver in that particular game. However, I liked Vegas because it was under 3 points, and at the time there were signs that the power ratings were shifting in Las Vegas's favor. All in all, it was a very good start for me, but not a very good start for Denver. So let's see what actually went wrong in terms of the way the season played out. Number one, Nathaniel Hackett was not all that he was cracked up to be. I wish I'd done a deeper dive on that. That's why I do these videos. That's why I am, and I do a lot of writing to look at things and look back at things. I encourage everybody to do so. And ultimately, Nathaniel Hackett's background was not that where he would be a decision maker that I could trust. I thought it'd be better than Vic Fangio. It turned out to be worse. If you remember all the decisions that were made in the Seattle game, in their win against Houston, in their game 11-10 when they beat San Francisco, all the way through, the decisions were very perplexing to say the least. He didn't know when to go for it, when to kick these long field goals, when they should have gone for it. The analytics would tell you to go for it. There were so many problems offensively, which I didn't count on happening, to the point where when you look back, can you believe this? 10 of the first 12 games Denver played with Russell Wilson, with an experienced offensive line, with Cortland Sutton at wide receiver. 10 times in the first 12 games, this team scored 16 points maximum. That we didn't expect. I also didn't expect on the positive side that the defense would hold up as long as it did. It did pretty well if you look at it. 8 of the first 9 games, the defense played well enough to have this team win. Under 19 points or fewer in 8 of the first 9 games, until finally it kind of collapsed a little bit. And it collapsed at a particular time, and we can all agree when that time was. The Denver Broncos traded Bradley Chubb to Miami. They got a lower round first round pick for him, so they recouped the first round pick for the 2023 season. But essentially they said, we're giving up on the season. We're dumping another pass rusher in Bradley Chubb. So now they've dumped Von Miller and Bradley Chubb in back-to-back seasons. And then the defense started to take a dive at that point, and we started to see games with margin against Denver, and Denver's season just skyrocketed to the point that when the Rams put 54 points, and the Rams were a troubled organization by week 15, when they put 54 points on Denver, that was it. Nathaniel Hackett was out the door, and it's all done. Denver is rebuilding or reloading again another season with new ownership. Of course, the owners had sold. The estate of Pat Bowlen had sold. So we have new ownership. We're going to have a new coach. We're probably going to try to rebuild the defense again. It just all fell apart in Denver. In that 2-7 finish that Denver had, 9 games, once again, just like with Von Miller the previous year, the Denver Bronco defense produced just 12 defensive sacks. And offensively, to answer one of the points, one of the keys that I had, what was the problem in Seattle? Was it Russell Wilson or was it the offensive line of Seattle? I would have guessed coming in, it would have been 60-40, 65-35, the offensive line. But if you look back at 2022, the Denver offensive line, there were some injuries, but it was still a veteran offensive line, still considered better than Seattle's. The Denver offensive line allowed 61 sacks in 2022. So Russell Wilson's game is going to need a lot of refinement, in my opinion. And it all starts with the new regime. So in looking back, and before we start on where we are now, February 4th, what's the future for Denver? We can all look back and say 2022 was a near disaster, if not an ultimate disaster for what Denver had hoped for. So why should we be any more excited about 2023? Well, first of all, Sean Payton's in the building. And by trade value status, what they gave up for him wasn't terrible. They had to give up that first round pick that they accumulated in the trade of Bradley Chubb. So they're out that particular pick. So once again, because of the Russell Wilson trade, they will not have any picks in rounds 1 or round 2. So they're going to have to do this. Of course, Sean Payton is used to that. When he was with New Orleans, they routinely traded a whole bunch of picks. New Orleans averaged drafting fewer than 5 players per year. So Payton's used to that, but he's going to mold his offense a particular way. He's done a wonderful job offensively with everybody he's come across. Jameis Winston was having almost a career year before he got hurt in 2020, I believe it was, or 2021, because he had reduced. Remember, Jameis Winston had thrown 30 interceptions in 2020. Under Sean Payton in 5, 6, 7 games, he had thrown only 2 or 3 interceptions. So Sean Payton was well underway to fixing Jameis Winston. Can he do the same with Russell Wilson? That's going to be interesting because once again, for me, it's cautious optimism with Denver. Now, their season win total is probably going to be amped up for 2 reasons. Number one, because Sean Payton's in the building, he's going to get a certain amount of clout, and you're going to get a certain amount of people gravitating to the overs for Denver in season wins. So you're going to lose a little bit of value there, but you get Sean Payton. And number 2, they're going to have that 4th place schedule again. We'll see what happens with their defensive coordinator hire. This is going to be a very key hire because they need to find a pass rush again. If you just go by the time that they're without Bradley Chubb, this team is going to be bottom 3 to bottom 5 in terms of putting pressure on opposing cornerbacks. That's going to mean that the defensive backs are going to have to cover for longer periods of time. That's not a recipe for success in the NFL when you're facing Pat Mahomes twice and Justin Herbert twice. And that doesn't include whoever else is going to be on their schedule. So what they're going to have to do is sign some key free agents, I think 1 or 2 pass rushers. I think the offense is going to get better. Hopefully they'll have better health at wide receiver. Hopefully they'll find a tight end that's going to be consistent. That was an area when they lost Noah Fant in the trade of Russell Wilson. That hurt them. Their offensive line is good enough, but they're going to have to train Russell Wilson to play a little bit differently. And I think he will trust Sean Payton to do that. And their 2021 draft choice, Williams, out of the backfield, who was highly touted. He went down with injury very early this past season in 2022. He's had a full year to recuperate. So I expect he can hit the ground running. He's a potential 1,000-yard rusher. I think their run game will be fine. So where are we right now as we close the Denver Broncos season 2022 recap? Disaster last year, hope for this coming year. I think we can see an 8, even with the 9th home game where they play in altitude. I think this is a 9-8 team right now. I'll be very curious to see where the season win total lies. Of course, there'll be more things to look at once we see what the draft and free agency holds. But if you're a Denver Bronco fan, I know you've been told this year after year after year, but right now, maybe 2023 is a cause for being right back on track. If we can get Russell Wilson fixed just a little bit, I think Sean Payton can put them back into winning ways. Thank you again for watching my season previews. What we have next, we may have one or two in the AFC prior to Monday, but doubleheader Monday. And I'm going to have a special guest previewing and reviewing with me the LA Chargers and a special guest with me with the Las Vegas Raiders. So please subscribe. Please mark your calendars for Monday live or after the fact, because we've got some exciting previews coming up in the AFC West. Thanks again. You've been watching my 2022 NFC Expert exit videos, and we'll see you down the road.